Hello, my name is Lauren Goodrich, and I'm the Senior Eurasia Analyst here at Stratfor. I'm sitting with my associate, Eugene Chausovsky, and we've been discussing today the ramifications and the fallout since the agreement between the United States, the EU, Russia, and Ukraine in Geneva yesterday. So, Eugene, there's a framework that has now been put in place between the four players. What are the reactions inside of Ukraine to this?
Well, so far, the reactions have been pretty minimal in terms of groups laying down their arms. A lot of the armed groups have said that they're actually not going to abide by the agreement.
These are the groups in the east, right?
Right. In eastern Ukraine, the armed pro-Russian separatists. Some of them have said that they would only after the Ukrainian government follows through with some major concessions like the federalization issue, like giving them greater rights. So in the initial days, we haven't seen any actual major effects yet on the ground. Although it is notable that even Kerry, after the talks, did say that he expects that it will take some time, that he understands that it's not going to happen overnight, essentially, the disarmament of these groups. But so far, we haven't seen a major effect.
Especially because no one quite knows what this deal is yet. There's a framework in place, and there's a discussion of giving more autonomy to the regions, but no one knows what that means yet. And, of course, everyone in the East wants to talk about federalization, where in Kiev, they're now starting to flirt with the idea of decentralization. And that's something that even Russian President Putin yesterday in his talk with the Russian people said that Russia was happy to even hear Kiev start to move towards that.
Yeah, I think that's the real notable part of the agreement. Is not that it's necessarily going to change things right away on the ground, but a framework has been set up over what a potential deal could look like. So from the Russian side of things, obviously it is important that the Ukrainian government is neutralized, or that it does not move forward with its goals to integrate further with the West, with the EU, with NATO. And this decentralization move is a key aspect of this, because that means it would give greater powers, greater say to the East, which would essentially sort of counter this Western integration drive. From the Ukrainian side of things, obviously their biggest concern is these pro-Russian militia groups in the East.
Well, the government's biggest concern.
From the government's perspective. So that really hampers and undermines their ability to rule the country. So that's really the key here is we now know what the two sides want. They have laid it out, and now it's a matter of actually following through with it.
And it was important yesterday to have Putin move from the talk of federalization to possibly being accepting of decentralization, almost like moderating the Russian tone. Russia doesn't care what happens as far as whether it's a federalization or a decentralization. All they care about is that there is some sort of devolvement of power from Kiev into the regions. They don't care what way and functionality it takes place in.
Exactly. I mean, and it's notable that nobody has actually laid out what federalization would really look like. No draft legislation has been put in place. There's still a lot of disagreement, even from within these pro-Russian Eastern movements in Ukraine. But from Russia's perspective, it is clear what it wants, which is that the government stays sort of checked, that the Western-leaning aspects are checked by and do factor in the interests of the East when it comes to things like language, when it comes to things like being able to elect their own governors. So this is really the key here, I think, in moving forward.
Mm-hmm. And it seems the tone inside of Russia today has been fairly... They're happy with the deal. They're skeptical still of how things are actually going to take place, but they're happy that there is actually a deal that involves some sort of decentralization. And this is important because Russia really has taken this crisis and its position in this crisis to a point that it can't afford to go any further. Russia doesn't want to take military action. This is something at Stratfor we've discussed again and again. And logistically and financially, it would be very difficult for Russia to militarily intervene. But there's another side to this in that inside of Russia itself, the Russian people do not want Russia to intervene in eastern Ukraine. They loved that Russia took Crimea because Crimea is theirs. But the Russian people themselves, they're mostly against, I think the latest poll numbers were 64% of the population is against any military action inside of eastern Ukraine. So it would be something where Putin was riding high off of taking Crimea. It would most likely be a hit to him politically if he did militarily intervene into eastern Ukraine. Another aspect of this is that this has really hampered a lot of Russia's foreign business dealings. Germany has suspended its military deals with Russia. Japan has canceled its business delegation going to Russia. And so Russia has to start thinking, all right, we have this framework of a deal. We can live with that for now. And now we need to think about how do we start repairing our relationships around the world.
Yeah, and I think another aspect to consider, which actually is kind of a hampering effect to the deal or potential stumbling block to the deal, is can Russia control all of these pro-Russian separatist groups? I mean, clearly Russia has a lot of influence amongst these regions politically. Even there's been clear signs that Russia does have some sort of influence over the armed groups. But whether they can actually clamp down or whether they can actually influence the groups to the extent that they lay down all of their weapons and no longer become a problem. We've already seen the drawbacks of that happen in Kiev and in Western Ukraine, where groups like Right Sector, while they nominally supported the opposition, after the opposition got into power, they were not able to be completely controlled. So this is one of the aspects that does make the deal, at least in its full extent, very questionable moving forward.
Very true. So right now, Moscow's in the dilemma. How do they deal with the micro inside of Ukraine, and then how do they start to repair their relationships and not escalate the situation any further abroad? That was very interesting, Eugene. Thank you so much. For more information, go to stratfor.com.